Welcome to Cognitive Curves. Today we're taking on a big topic, understanding women. Now, this isn't about putting anyone in a box. Every woman is unique, but we've got some fascinating research and theories from psychology to explore, and we're here to break it all down with a unified voice from our team of experts. Whether it's gender communication styles, emotional intelligence, or even misconceptions around feminism, we're diving into it all. So let's get curious.
All right, welcome everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into understanding women.
Ooh, that's a big topic.
It is, right?
Yeah.
We've got a ton of research and theories here from our listeners.
Wow. So where do we even begin?
Well, I think it's important to say up front, we're not trying to put women in a box or anything.
Yeah, every woman is unique.
Absolutely. But there are these broad patterns and influences. Like, have you ever heard of genderlect?
Genderlect. Is that like men and women speaking different languages?
Exactly. That's actually the idea. And we've got some fascinating stuff from linguist Deborah Tannen on that.
Interesting. I'm all ears.
Okay, so Tannen's research, it suggests that men and women might use language for totally different purposes.
Really? Like how?
Well, women, they tend to use language more for building connections, fostering that rapport.
Ah, I see.
Like they'll use phrases that emphasize shared experiences or feelings.
Right, like I totally get that, or tell me more about it.
Exactly. It's all about creating that emotional bond.
Interesting. And what about men? How do they use language, according to this research?
Well, while they value connection too, it seems men often use language more to establish status.
Status? You mean like who's in charge?
Kinda, yeah. Or they'll showcase their knowledge, maybe debate playfully to assert their position.
So it's not about one being better or worse, just different approaches.
Exactly. And that can definitely lead to misunderstandings if you're not aware of it.
For sure. It's like you're speaking different dialects almost.
And speaking of different communication styles, there's this thing called politeness theory from Robin Lakoff.
Politeness theory?
Yeah, it suggests women use more hedges and tag questions when they speak.
Hedges and tag questions?
Yeah.
Could you give me an example?
Sure. Like saying sort of, or maybe, or ending a sentence with, isn't it?
Oh, okay, I see. And what's the reasoning behind that?
Well, Lakoff doesn't think it's because women are insecure.
Oh, good. Because that's the stereotype I really don't like.
Right. It's more likely due to social conditioning.
Yeah.
Women are often taught to be polite, avoid conflict.
To be agreeable, right?
Exactly. So they end up using these softer language patterns.
It's funny because I catch myself doing that all the time. What about you?
Oh, totally. I think most women do. It's like this ingrained thing.
It makes you wonder, right?
Yeah.
How much of our communication is shaped by these social expectations?
For sure. It's definitely something to think about. But hey, let's switch gears a bit. What about emotions?
Emotions.
Yeah, are women really more emotional than men? Is there any truth to that stereotype?
Well, it's complicated. We have to define what we mean by emotional first.
Good point. So, what exactly is emotional intelligence?
Well, emotional intelligence, or EI, it's basically the ability to understand and manage your own emotions.
Okay, that makes sense.
And to recognize emotions in others and then use that understanding to navigate social situations.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. But studies have shown that women tend to score higher in some areas of EI.
Oh, really? Which areas?
Particularly in recognizing and empathizing with the emotions of others.
When you put it that way, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, historically, women have taken on a lot of caregiving roles. Raising children, fostering those emotional bonds.
Right. So maybe those experiences contribute to developing those skills.
Possibly. But we can't forget socialization, too.
Oh, right. Nature versus nurture.
Exactly. From a young age, girls are often encouraged to express their emotions more openly, to be caring and compassionate.
While boys might be told to, man up and hide their feelings.
Yeah, unfortunately. Which can definitely impact how they process and express emotions as adults.
It's amazing how these early experiences can have such a lasting impact.
Absolutely. And there's actually a really interesting study that found
Oh, tell me.
female medical students scored significantly higher on empathy tests than their male counterparts.
Wow, that's fascinating. Even in a professional setting, those socialization differences seem to play out.
It makes you think, doesn't it? How these differences might affect not just personal relationships, but workplaces, everything.
Totally. This whole emotional intelligence thing, it's clearly a key factor in building stronger connections and maybe even understanding those tricky interpersonal dynamics.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to a topic that can be a bit well, controversial.
Ooh, lay it on me.
Feminism. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot, and sometimes people have really strong opinions about it.
For sure. But at its core, it's actually pretty simple.
How so?
It's about equality, dismantling systems of oppression that hurt both men and women.
Right. Like Bell Hooks said, feminism is for everybody.
Exactly. It's about creating a more just world for everyone, not just one gender.
Yes. Now, within feminism, there are all these different perspectives and approaches.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like we hear terms like liberal feminism, radical feminism, intersectional feminism.
Right. And cultural feminism. Could you break those down for us a bit?
Sure. So liberal feminism, it mainly focuses on achieving equality through like legal and political reforms.
Okay, so working within the system to create change.
Exactly. Then there's radical feminism, which looks more critically at patriarchal structures, those power systems.
So radical feminism is more about challenging those deep-rooted systems.
Yeah. Then we've got intersectional feminism, which recognizes that gender intersects with other identities like race, class, sexuality.
It's about acknowledging that not all women experience oppression in the same way.
Precisely. And finally, there's cultural feminism, which celebrates traditionally feminine qualities like nurturing, empathy, cooperation.
So cultural feminism is saying those qualities are valuable and should be equally respected.
Exactly. They're not weaknesses.
Yeah.
They can make the world a more balanced and compassionate place.
This all just goes to show that feminism isn't this one big thing. It's a complex tapestry of ideas.
Absolutely. And understanding these nuances is key for having meaningful conversations and actually working towards a more equitable society.
Couldn't agree more. Now let's shift gears again to something that's become really popular lately.
Okay, what's that?
Body positivity.
Oh, yeah. I'm all for that.
It's about embracing and celebrating all bodies, no matter their shape, size, or appearance.
And the research actually suggests there are some big mental health benefits to that.
Oh, really? Like what?
Studies have shown that embracing body positivity can boost self-esteem, reduce body dissatisfaction.
Makes sense. When you feel good about yourself, it shows.
Right. It can even improve overall well-being. But there are some complexities to this.
Oh.
Like what? Well, while it's important to celebrate all bodies, we shouldn't forget about healthy habits either.
So it's about finding that balance between self-love and taking care of your physical health.
Exactly. One study suggested that just promoting body acceptance without encouraging healthy choices
Could actually lead to complacency.
Yeah, like overlooking issues like obesity, which can have health risks.
That's a good point. So how do you wind that balance between self-love and healthy choices?
It's a personal journey, but I think the key is embracing and celebrating our bodies
Right.
while also taking care of our physical and mental health.
I love that. It's about honoring ourselves fully.
Exactly. And speaking of honoring ourselves, I think it's time we dive into relationships.
Ooh, yes. The big R word. I know our listeners are curious about how women approach love, connection, what they really want in a partner.
Right. So one framework that can help us understand relationships is attachment theory.
Attachment theory, what's that all about?
Well, it suggests that our early childhood experiences, particularly with caregivers, can shape how we relate to romantic partners later on.
Wow, so those early bonds can really affect our love lives.
They can. And there are three main attachment styles: secure, anxious, and avoidant.
Ooh, tell me more.
Okay, so people with a secure attachment style, they're comfortable with intimacy, vulnerability. They can communicate their needs openly and trust their partner's love and support.
That sounds lovely.
It is. Then there's the anxious attachment style. These folks tend to crave validation, fear, abandonment. They might struggle with insecurity and constantly seek reassurance.
Ah, I see. And what about avoidant attachment?
People with an avoidant style often prioritize independence and emotional distance. They might find it hard to open up fully.
It's fascinating how these different styles can play out in relationships.
Right. And interestingly, research suggests women are more likely to have an anxious attachment style compared to men.
I wonder if that links back to the societal expectations we talked about earlier.
You mean how women are encouraged to be more emotionally expressive?
Exactly, and to be more attuned to the needs of others. Maybe that contributes to developing that anxious style.
It's definitely possible. It's amazing how all these factors, from societal norms to early childhood experiences, can influence our relationships.
Absolutely. Now, before we go any further, I'm curious, can you relate to any of these attachment styles?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's definitely something to think about. But you know what LEE is interesting? Evolutionary psychology that offers a different perspective, although it can be a bit controversial.
Oh, tell me more. I love a good controversy.
Okay, so Evolutionary psychology suggests that men and women might have, evolved to have different mate preferences.
Really?
Like,
Based on our biology.
exactly. David Buss, a big researcher in this field, he says women across cultures tend to prioritize certain traits in partners.
Like what?
Things like financial stability, kindness, emotional stability.
Those sound like pretty desirable qualities to me. Not just for women, but for anyone.
Right. And the idea is that these preferences stem from, way back when.
Like caveman days.
Yeah. Like when women needed to secure a partner who could provide resources and support for raising children.
So those primal instincts might still be influencing us today.
That's the theory. But of course, it's been criticized for potentially reinforcing those traditional gender roles.
Right, and not everyone fits neatly into those boxes anyway.
Exactly. It's a complex topic. But even so, evolutionary psychology can offer some intriguing insights.
For sure. It just goes to show that understanding women, or any individual for that matter.
It's about going beyond those simple explanations.
Exactly. It's about recognizing this intricate dance between nature and nurture, biology and experience.
It's not about finding one definitive answer, but appreciating that beautiful complexity.
I love that. So, as we continue this deep dive, let's remember to keep our minds open and be ready to challenge our assumptions.
Agreed. There's still so much more to explore.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a wild mix of influences, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like a recipe with a ton of ingredients.
Totally. And speaking of ingredients, we gotta talk about hormones.
Ooh, hormones.
Well,
Are we talking about those stereotypical mood swings?
Exactly. Are those a real thing or just a myth?
Well, it's not so simple. Hormones DO play a role in how we regulate emotions, so it's not entirely made up.
So there's some truth to it.
Yeah, for instance, estrogen. It's a hormone mainly associated with women, and it can affect mood, sleep, even how we think.
Right, so those fluctuations during a woman's cycle, those can actually impact how she feels.
Exactly. There's research showing that estrogen levels can actually influence serotonin receptors in the brain.
And serotonin, that's the happy chemical, right?
Yeah, it plays a big role in regulating mood. So those hormonal shifts, they can sometimes lead to feeling irritable, sad, or anxious.
Makes sense. And it's not just the menstrual cycle either, right? Pregnancy, menopause, those are huge hormonal shifts too.
Absolutely. Those are times of massive change, both physically and emotionally. Understanding those hormonal influences is key for supporting women going through those experiences.
Definitely. It's a reminder to be more sensitive and understanding during those times. Hormones aren't an excuse for anything, but they can definitely contribute to those emotional ups and downs.
Yeah, it's about acknowledging that biological reality while also recognizing that everyone experiences and manages those hormonal shifts differently.
For sure. Okay, let's switch gears again. What about cognitive differences between men and women?
Cognitive differences? You mean like how our brains work?
Yeah. Are there really any scientific findings that support those old stereotypes about men being better at math and women at language?
Well, it's not as black and white as those stereotypes suggest. But research has found some subtle differences in brain structure and function between genders.
Interesting. So tell me more about these brain differences.
For example, women tend to have a larger corpus callosum.
Corpus what now?
Haha, it's a mouthful. Right. It's basically the bundle of nerve fibers that connect the two hemispheres of the brain.
Oh, okay. And women have a larger one?
On average, yeah. And this enhanced connectivity, some researchers believe it could explain why women often excel at tasks requiring, multitasking and integrating info from different sources.
So it's like having a super highway of communication between different parts of the brain.
Exactly. And that might contribute to strengths in areas like language processing and social intelligence.
Wow, fascinating. Okay, what about those spatial reasoning skills? We often hear about men being better at navigating mentally rotating objects. What does the research say about that?
There's some evidence suggesting that men, on average, perform slightly better on certain spatial tasks, like mentally rotating 3D objects or navigating unfamiliar places.
But wait, hold on. Does that mean women are just inherently worse at those things?
Not at all. Remember, we're talking about average differences. There's so much overlap between genders.
Right. Plenty of women are amazing at navigating in spatial stuff.
Exactly. And we can't forget about experience and training. Those can significantly impact those skills for anyone.
So if you're someone who wants to boost their spatial reasoning, there are ways to do it, regardless of gender.
Absolutely. It's never too late to learn and develop those skills. The key is to challenge those limiting beliefs and make sure everyone has equal opportunities to explore their potential.
I love that. Don't let stereotypes define your capabilities.
Exactly. It's about celebrating the diversity of human potential. We all have unique strengths to bring to the table.
Now, let's bring this back to relationships. How can understanding these nuances in communication and emotional intelligence, how can that help us build stronger connections?
Well, communication, it's the bedrock of any successful relationship, right?
For sure. And we've talked about how men and women might approach communication differently.
Yeah, women often prioritize that connection, that emotional intimacy, whereas men might focus more on problem solving or asserting their independence.
And those differences can sometimes lead to misunderstandings if we're not aware of them.
Big time. So the key is to approach conversations with empathy, really listen to your partner, and genuinely try to understand their perspective.
It's almost like learning to speak each other's language, right? Not just literally, but figuratively too.
Exactly. And it's not about changing who you are or trying to fit into a box. It's about understanding those differences and using that knowledge to communicate more effectively.
Love that. Celebrate your individuality, but also bridge those gaps in understanding.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And hey, let's not forget about nonverbal communication too.
Oh, right. Body language, facial expressions, tone of voice.
All of that.
Yeah.
It can convey so much meaning. Paying attention to those subtle cues can really deepen your connection with your partner.
It's like learning to read between the lines, to truly see the person behind the words.
Beautifully put. And, when it comes to navigating conflict, understanding those different communication styles can be super helpful.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, let's say a woman is expressing her feelings, looking for emotional support. A man might jump right into problem-solving mode, offering solutions instead of just listening and validating her emotions.
Oh, that's classic. I think a lot of couples have been there.
Right. And it's not about blaming anyone. It's just about recognizing those ingrained patterns and learning to communicate in ways that meet each other's needs.
Finding that sweet spot where both partners feel heard, understood, and supported.
Exactly. And that brings us back to emotional intelligence. Remember how we talked about women often scoring higher in certain areas of EI?
Yeah, like empathy and recognizing emotions in others. How does that play out in relationships?
Well, being able to tune into your partner's emotions, respond with empathy, that can create such a deeper sense of connection and intimacy.
It's like having this superpower to see the world through your partner's eyes.
It is.
Yeah.
And that ability to empathize, it's so valuable when navigating those tough conversations, those conflicts that inevitably come up in any relationship.
It's about putting yourself in your partner's shoes, even if you don't fully agree with their perspective.
Exactly. And when both partners feel understood and validated, it builds this foundation of trust and respect that allows the relationship to truly flourish.
Such a beautiful message. Okay, before we move on, I want to circle back to attachment styles for a sec. We talked about how those early childhood experiences can shape our romantic relationships.
Oh yeah, that's right. It's super important to recognize that those attachment styles, they can really influence how we approach intimacy, vulnerability, even conflict in our relationships.
So, like, if someone has an anxious attachment style, they might be more prone to seeking reassurance, fearing abandonment.
Exactly. And someone with an avoidance style might struggle with emotional closeness, prefer to keep some distance.
It's wild to think about how these unconscious patterns can play out in our interactions with others.
It is. But here's the good news. We're not necessarily stuck with our attachment styles.
Really?
Yeah, with awareness and effort, we can learn to develop more secure ways of relating.
So it's possible to break free from those unhealthy patterns and create healthier, more fulfilling relationships.
Absolutely. And therapy can be a huge help in exploring those patterns and learning those new ways of connecting.
I always say therapy is like a superpower. It's not a weakness to seek help. It's actually a sign of strength and a commitment to personal growth.
Couldn't agree more. It's about empowering ourselves to create the relationships we truly deserve. Okay, now let's dive into something I know people are curious about. What women really desire in a partner. We touched on evolutionary psychology earlier, but there's so much more to it than that.
Right. It's not as simple as saying all women want this one thing.
Absolutely not. It's influenced by so many factors. Biology, personal experiences, cultural norms, individual values.
So much complexity.
Right. Every woman has her own unique set of preferences. But that being said, are there any common themes or patterns when we look at what women generally find attractive?
Okay, I'm all ears. Spill the tea.
Well, research suggests that women often prioritize qualities like kindness, intelligence, emotional stability, and a sense of humor.
Those sound like great qualities in anyone, not just a partner.
Totally. They contribute to feeling safe, trusted, compatible, all essential for a strong and lasting bond.
Makes sense. So beyond those core qualities, what else might influence a woman's attraction?
Personal experiences play a huge role. Past relationships, family dynamics, life experiences. They all shape our beliefs about what we seek in a romantic connection.
So, for example, someone who's been hurt by infidelity might prioritize loyalty and trustworthiness above all else.
Exactly. And we can't forget about culture. Societal norms also influence our perceptions of attractiveness.
Oh, right. What's considered attractive in one culture might be totally different in another.
Absolutely. Beauty and attraction are subjective, influenced by so many things.
This makes me think about how media and pop culture often portray these unrealistic standards of beauty and masculinity. Like, how does that impact our expectations and relationships?
It's huge. We got to be mindful of those external influences and define our own view and standards for what we find attractive and desirable.
Don't let those superficial ideals dictate your choices. Focus on qualities that truly matter. Kindness, respect, shared values.
Couldn't agree more. But ultimately, I think the most important factor in any relationship is that connection, that chemistry between two people.
Yeah, that spark. When you find someone who truly sees you, gets you, accepts you for who you are.
Exactly. It's about finding someone who complements your strengths, supports your growth, and makes you feel safe, loved, valued.
I love that. That's what we all want, right?
Absolutely. It goes beyond those superficial qualities and societal expectations. It's about that deep connection.
Now, before we move on, I think it's important to acknowledge that not all women even desire romantic relationships.
Right. It's so true. Societal pressure can be intense, pushing women to find a partner, settle down.
Yeah.
But choosing to be single is totally valid and fulfilling too.
It's about honoring our own desires and defining what happiness means for us, regardless of what society says.
Yes. Celebrate the diversity of human experiences. There's no one right way to live your life.
Such an important reminder. Okay, I think it's time for our final reflections on understanding women. This has been quite a journey.
Yeah, it's been fascinating, hasn't it? Unpacking all these different aspects of understanding women. So before we wrap things up, I want to touch on something we mentioned earlier, that understanding isn't about finding like one definitive answer.
Right. We can't reduce these complex individuals to a simple set of rules.
Exactly. It's more about appreciating all the different experiences, influences, perspectives. They all shape each woman's unique journey.
Like a tapestry, right, with all these intricate threads woven together.
I love that. It's a beautiful way to put it. And it reminds us to approach these conversations with open minds, be willing to embrace that complexity.
Absolutely. And to remember that understanding is a process, not a destination. You got to stay curious, listen carefully, and be willing to challenge your own assumptions along the way.
Speaking of assumptions, let's talk about those common misconceptions or stereotypes about women. We've debunked a few already, but are there any others that stand out to you? Well, one that comes to mind is the idea that women are inherently more emotional than men.
Oh yeah, that's a classic.
We talked about how women might be socialized to express emotions more openly. But that doesn't mean men don't experience the same range of feelings.
It's like that old saying, men are from Mars, women are from Venus.
Yeah.
It just creates this false division.
Exactly. We're all human with complex emotional lives, and those emotions shouldn't be stereotyped based on gender.
Couldn't agree more. Another one I often hear is that women are just naturally better at multitasking than men.
Ah, yes. The multitasking myth.
We did talk about the corpus callosum and how it might help with communication between different parts of the brain.
Right, but that doesn't automatically translate to superior multitasking skills.
So bigger corpus callosum doesn't equal better multitasker.
Not necessarily. Multitasking is a complex skill. It's influenced by experience, personality, the specific tasks at hand. It's not that simple.
Right. And some research even suggests that men can be just as good at multitasking, depending on the situation.
Exactly. Plus, some people argue that multitasking isn't even that beneficial. It can actually hurt your productivity and focus.
Interesting point. Maybe it's not about being a master multitasker, but being mindful of our limits and focusing on what's truly important.
I think that's a great takeaway. Work smarter, not harder.
Absolutely. Okay, before we wrap up this deep dive, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can all contribute to creating a more equitable and empowering world for women. What are some concrete steps we can take individually and collectively?
Ooh, that's a big question. I think it starts with awareness, recognizing those subtle biases and stereotypes that can sneak into our thoughts, language, actions.
So being mindful of our own WN biases and challenging those harmful stereotypes whenever we encounter them.
Exactly. And then advocating for policies and practices that promote gender equality across the board in education, healthcare, the workplace, politics.
Yeah, we need a world where everyone, regardless of gender, has equal opportunities to thrive.
Absolutely. And that includes supporting organizations that empower women and girls, whether through education, mentorship, or economic opportunities.
Lifting each other up.
Yeah.
Creating a world where everyone feels valued and respected.
Yes. And celebrating the incredible diversity and strength of women, highlighting their achievements, their contributions throughout history and across cultures.
It's about rewriting the narrative, making sure women's stories are heard and celebrated.
And on a personal level, I think it's about approaching our interactions with respect, empathy, a genuine desire to understand.
Listening to their stories, honoring their experiences, recognizing their worth and dignity.
And challenging those who perpetuate harmful stereotypes or discriminate.
Yeah.
Being allies, standing up for what's right,
Right.
creating a world where everyone feels safe and empowered.
Yes. A world where gender is no longer a barrier to opportunity or a source of inequality. That's the dream.
It is. And it takes collective action, compassion, and a commitment to justice.
Well said. Well, on that inspiring note, I want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into understanding women. It's been an incredible conversation.
It really has. I've loved exploring all this with you.
And to our listeners, remember, understanding is an ongoing journey. Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep those conversations going.
And never underestimate the power of your own voice. You have so much to offer the world.
Beautifully said. Thank you for listening to The Deep Dive. Until next time, stay curious.
As we wrap up this deep dive into understanding women, remember that this is an ongoing journey. It's not about finding definitive answers, but staying curious, open-minded, and willing to question our assumptions. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to hit subscribe and drop a comment below with your thoughts or questions. We'd love to hear your perspective and keep this conversation going. Thanks for watching, and keep exploring those cognitive curves.